showing
Yeah,
those.
like- Thank you.
You're live, chief.
I'm going to call the meeting to order. Thank you for everyone for coming. We're going to start off by signing the pledge of allegiance. Thank members of the public for coming. We're going to have our Assistant Director, Margaret Garrett, pass out index cards. If you could just write your name, last name, phone number, a way to an email, address, the way to contact you. We'd just like to keep that on file. And we have a very special guest with us tonight, our Town Supervisor, Peter Barber. It's a special update. So, thank you, Peter, for coming.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to give you a real quick update again. As you know, this library actually is located on Mercer Fair Lane. Mercer Fair Lane is a private road, not a town road, which means the town has no responsibility. We don't pave, we don't remove any snow, we don't do anything with that road. It's a completely private road. It's owned in two parts by First, or Route 20 to roughly where the blockade is now. It's owned by St. Peter's Partners, Health Partners. And the balance of the road over the Winding Brook is owned by First Columbia. I would say sometime around just before Christmas, I think it was, the road was blocked. Apparently it was blocked because, by First Columbia, because a car had hit one of the bigger potholes that was close to the Winding Brook, and it caused some property damage, no personal injuries, but property damage. And they decided that the public access was not in their best interest, so they blocked the road. A letter, I think the entire board signed a letter asking the council, hey, be a good neighbor, reopen this road. But the bottom line is it's a private road, private property, and there's very little that anybody can do. I then reached out to the First Columbia, again, that's the entity that blocked the road, to see what we could do. And among the things we started talking about was getting a temporary easement so that town highway people would go in and take a look at the road and see what we could do from the town's perspective to bring this road up to two different standards. The first standard would be making the road traversable by cars. It's not going to be what you call a town road with a nice course of pavement and line or anything like that. It's just going to be basic road. The second part would be bringing it to town standards. And what does that mean? It's engineering. It's it's very involved process. Now, one thing, the town doesn't do this very often. In fact, I was checking out, I don't think the town's ever gotten involved in taking over a private road. Usually roads are built by developers, subdivisions, they build the town specs, they do all the costs, all the infrastructure, stormwater, everything is done by them, and we just take a dedication by the town board, and then we maintain it thereafter. So this is highly unusual. But after talking with Kim and others, it was pretty clear that access to the traffic light at Winding Brook is really important, particularly for people who live to the west of this destination. Doesn't mean you still can't take a safe left out at certain times, but still, I would often take that road. Now, I know it's technically trespassing over a private road. So we've got a temporary easement to inspect the road. At this point, we determined that despite some of the larger potholes, the road is in fairly good condition. In fact, from basically Route 20 up to the turn of the road, it's in excellent condition, even though it doesn't have a top course. And then when you get to the bend, particularly when you get closer to Winding Brook, it's still in pretty good condition, but it's got some sizable potholes. One thing we have not done yet, because we just haven't had a chance to get in there, is do a camera inspection to determine what's the quality of inspect, that is in fairly good condition, but we have to get a camera in there. Our water department has a camera. Just gotta make sure we get enough picking order to get access, to that camera. So the goal basically is, now I've already reached out again now to the First Columbia. They seem to be receptive to the idea of dedicating or really transferring ownership of the property that the road sits on to the town. I can tell you right now, the town won't do anything on that road until it acquires ownership. I'm not gonna have the highway department work on a private road. It's too much liability, insurance and whatnot, it's too complicated. So we'd rather get control of the road than we can decide on our schedule how to open it. So the short-term goal is we get, again, if the infrastructure, stormwater comes out okay. Again, we don't really want to buy into a problem because if stormwater needs to be replaced, you gotta tear it up and it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. If we can confirm that the stormwater is in reasonably good shape or can be repaired at a relatively low cost, Steve Oliver, highway superintendent, is going to be retiring on April 27th, but committed to getting this done. We now have a paving equipment the town acquired about in the past year or so, so we have the ability to pave roads. We don't mill roads, so one thing that we're looking at is not to overly complicate this, is the first part of the road is owned by St. Peter's Health Partners. We've already been in contact with them about upgrading their road to town standards. They're willing to do it because they have active uses going on. They understand that they need to upgrade the road, so they're willing to do that. So we may be swapping their ability to mill the road, the First Columbia part, and we will pave the entire road. But this is getting a little bit too far ahead of ourselves. But the bottom line is that we hope, certainly when the spring comes about in the early summertime, to get the road reopened. Again, it's contingent upon getting, again, title and ownership, of the road. Can't emphasize how unusual it is asking Steve to come in and actually either rebuild but he says he can do it, he's confident he can do it. They don't want to buy into, a problem. Any questions about the road at this point? Yeah.
Yeah, how would the town get ownership of the road? Would they have to condemn the property? Or?
No, there'll be a deed. There'll just be, we're not taking the property, we're not seizing the property, they're going to deed the property to us.
And they're willing to do that?
They are receptive because the bottom line is that at some point they may build a building back there and they've got a nice road there, so they'll have to build it. It's sort of but the bottom line is, some of the decisions you make is really for safety. People, can't wait on others to take on that responsibility.
Is there some thought being made to widening Mercy Care Lane so that we could have a turn lane there as well, left turn lane?
Yeah, there's a good chance, I believe, that the plans that I had seen from Dan Hirschberg, who's the engineer for St. Peter's Health Partners, has plans for a turn lane. I think, in fact, I even talked to Tim about that because that might impact your sign and whatnot. One thing you also might find is when you actually look at the width of the road, typically it's a 60-foot width, 30 feet of pavement, 15 feet on each side. You actually find out the town's actually going to own part of your property. Or school district property, how about that? Yeah, but we'll figure that all out. It's not going to be a problem. And not to overly complicate this, the town also took title through a tax foreclosure sale. We contacted Albany County, the Albany County Land Bank. We now own the strip of land behind the library. People might think that gives us access to Wagon Brook. Not quite. It gets about 30 feet short of Wagon Brook. But we've already reached out to the owners of that property, and they seem to be amenable to potentially exploring that possibility. But that's more of a back burner thing at this point. We would like to get Mercy Care Lane upgraded to a town road. Any other questions on that part? And I can move very quickly to the sidewalks. Okay. Sidewalks again is another highly unusual thing for the town to get involved in when it comes to a sidewalk on a state highway. Usually the entity that owns the road builds the sidewalk, or the developer is developing. There's no developer there, but as we all know, even on a daily basis, we see people walking the shoulder of the road, others pushing library to rent temporary easements, because particularly the highway department people are working, and they're doing some grading work that would help to, quote, use, access your property so they can basically stand there and do their work. So again, we have cooperation from all the other property owners, I'm sure we'll get the school district and the library. So hopefully, again, it's primarily motivated by safety. We're doing the same thing at Linwood Elementary School. Got another grant that's fairly expensive. You know, again, 20% match for the town to do the same thing from Old State Road up to the Linwood Elementary School. Once you get to the school grounds, we have no jurisdiction. Sorry, Barbara. It's up to the school then to get the continued sidewalk up to the front door. So.
Peter, where do we stand, something you and I have talked about, but not for a while, when Mercy Care Lane is rebuilt from Western Avenue to the back of the health facilities, are we wanting to put a sidewalk between Our Lady of Mercy and the library?
Yeah, the plan that St. Peter's Health Partners has put together shows a sidewalk on, I forget what side, it's only on one side of Mercy Care Lane. My assumption is, and I can confirm, it's on the library side.
Okay.
They're gonna go, the sidewalk's gonna go to the place that would expect most of the traffic to.
Okay.
It's gonna be the library. They don't want people to be on the other side of Mercy Care Lane and do a crosswalk over. Now that, again, can indicate your sign and its placement and whatnot, but, you know, highway superintendent, whoever that may be, will be working with you on that.
And on a related note, which we haven't spoken about, but I know that there's a possible development on Winding Brook of 52 units. Will there be sidewalk from those units up to Western Ave?
No, it would be a sidewalk up to Mercy Care.
Oh, okay,
The
great.
expanse of the property.
Okay,
At some point, once the Mercy Care Lane becomes a town road, then there would be some interest in extending the sidewalk up Mercy Care Lane. But that may not happen until First Columbia, develops the property back there. As you may know, there was actually an approval for an office building, 2002, 2003, somewhere in that time frame. And under that permit, they were supposed to upgrade Mercy Care Lane and dedicate it to the town. They never built the building, so they're not gonna meet the conditions, and they're willing to basically walk away from their permit. At some point, they're gonna have to come back to the town looking for a building, and, the town had to go through the trouble of spending some money, Mercy Care Lane, we may be looking for some other improvement nearby to mitigate that expense.
so one more slightly complicated question, but when the road has been opened, I often exit that way, and you drive down this way, and then you come to a stop at the corner of Winding Brook, and it's a pretty difficult left-hand turn, and I don't know exactly who the property owner is right there, but I think it would be a good idea to trim back some vegetation, and I'm guessing it's not the town's responsibility.
Actually, it very well could be. Again, once it becomes a town road, the highway superintendent will go out and do a site distance. Based upon the speed of the road, they want to make sure that the site distance is a certain number of feet in both directions. The town on Winding Brook has probably a 60-foot road, 15-foot right of way, so they would have control over the first 15 feet. If there was some obstruction on private property, usually the highway department reaches out to the property owner. They're cooperative as long as we're doing the work. They don't care. The same issue has come up with townhouse development further down opposite. You just talked about the YMCA, the 52-unit townhouse. There is a need to cut back on the landscaping and maybe even push back a little bit the berm that's blocking the view to the left.
Peter,
This way.
after the DOT installs the sidewalks and the Castleton sidewalks on Mercy Care, is it the library's responsibility then to maintain those, essentially, plow them?
No, the town maintains all sidewalks.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that means it also has to maintain sidewalks on Route 20, they get buried in snow repeatedly by big snow plows. But we're able to, we start off with two of those little snow plows, sidewalk snow plows, about 2 years ago, we got 2 more. They're very talented highway department mechanics who take a used
want to get your input, and we certainly want you guys to ask questions, but we don't necessarily see this as necessarily the medium to do that. I'm not discouraging you from asking questions or comments. I want that, but there will be some other meeting that we will have. We want to invite you all to kind of get your thoughts, your impressions of it. So feel free to ask questions, but we're trying to. We will have another meeting where we will get your guys' input on. So I should keep that in mind as after the presentation. So with that, I'll let our library director Tim.
Thanks. I would like to thank all the members of the public and the staff for coming today, and talk very, very briefly, a minute, about Paul Mays and the project here. So approximately a year ago, we were celebrating or approaching our 25th anniversary in this building and our 60th anniversary as a chartered public library. And I asked the board, I said, when you own a building, whether it's your home or a library, after 25 years, it starts to get a little rough around the edges. And I said, we really have three choices as I see it. One is to do nothing at all. One is to renovate the existing building, and one is to consider enlarging the building a little bit. And the board at that point made the decision that doing nothing at all was not an option. So the other two remained options. We then hired Paul Mays, who's a principal architect with Butler, Rowland & Mays, a firm in Ballston Spa that specializes in library design. And incidentally, Paul is also a longtime library trustee and former chairman of the board, both in Greenwich and with SALS, the Southern Adirondack Library System. And so Paul has been working with us for about a year. He's had extensive interviews with the staff, the board, and the foundation. He's also had one full day of community groups where we found different groups representing different aspects of the community and invited them in to meet with Paul and his team. Then there were 3 public design charrettes held here on summer evenings last summer. And then lastly, there was both an online survey and a survey in the lobby that was done with great, giant, big pieces of paper asking people in the public to give their priorities for the future of the library. So Paul has taken all of that information and gone through a long synthesis process to kind of pull all of that stuff together. And he has a plan that he will be presenting to you here momentarily. It is not a final plan. So one other thing that I'd like to say really quickly, I got an email from the Gilderland Central School District in December. And the school district is planning a capital project. And the email said, we'd like some members of the public to join our capital project committee. And I said, boy, that sounds really cool. So I asked my board if I could do that. I also asked the superintendent of schools, who is my wife, I said, what kind of response do you get when you send out these emails that say, we'd like you to join our committee? And she said, essentially, we never get any response. Nobody really joins our committee. So somewhat naively, I thought that would be the case when I sent out such an email about 3 weeks ago. And many of you in the room are probably people, among the 50 people who responded to that email and said that they were interested in hearing more. Naturally, I can't put 50 people onto a committee that's already got 14 people, but we are going to have probably 2 public meetings on different evenings, or perhaps one on a daytime, so that we can get the majority of those people who've expressed that interest to come in. You'll be seeing the plan tonight, but then you can digest it and come up with suggestions and so forth, because the plan is not yet final. The plan also, I would have to emphasize, has not been voted on by the board. So that, theoretically could happen tonight, but I would personally predict that the board members would also like some time to digest the plan before they make any decisions about the future of the library. So before I introduce Paul, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Just wanted to thank Chris Aldridge, who was our chair of the committee that kind of really has been in charge of this, and he's done a tremendous amount of work. So I just wanted to thank him real quickly. You've done a great job. Thank you for everything.
Hey, Brian, are
Yes.
we going to do treasurer's report first?
Sorry. You know what? Yeah, all right. We'll do the treasurer's report so you can leave. All right. I'm sorry.
It's
Paul,
September
second.
15th,
So-
Paul, I'm sorry.
You can do the treasurer's
Yeah.
report.
Okay, about 4 hours because I only 4 more.
Hold on, I know it's a little busy time, so yeah. All
Yeah,
right.
15th is bad. It's quick. So, you've all seen than that, nothing too crazy in either the revenue or expense lines. Really hasn't been much.
Make a motion to accept the treasurer's report as presented.
Is there a second? Seconded by Barbara. All those in favor? Opposed? I pass unanimously. Thank you, Carol.
Thanks, Brian, sorry.
No problem.
Thank you. So, for the,
Was that motion the check register and the treasurer's report, or just the treasurer's report?
Just treasurer's report.
Check register later? Okay.
so for the benefit of anyone who didn't know, that was Carol Balakovic, who's our treasurer. So thank you, Carol. Carol is a tax professional, so it's a tough time of year for her. So without further ado, I'll introduce Paul Hayes. Paul, where did you decide to sit? Are you going to take my
Why not
seat?
just stand right here?
Okay.
You want to take my spot?
I'd actually rather not sit, if that's okay,
No,
because it'd be very difficult to keep turning
I
around.
don't understand. That's why I didn't know sitting here.
So everyone can hear me all right?
Yes.
Is that okay? Good. We'll see if the remote slide advancer works. That's going to be a technology we'll check out as well as we go along. But I'm very happy to be here tonight to update again the board and an interested community in what's happening. You'll recall that I was here in December, and we had talked about some of the initial ideas that have been developed over the last 6 months or so by the committee. It has been, and by definition our process is, extremely collaborative as we try and work on what is the most appropriate library for this community. I work on libraries all over New York State. I'm going to have to move to advanced slides. I work on libraries all over New York State, and you can imagine that each community is slightly different, from small towns to larger cities and so forth, and the way libraries are chartered. And as such, library services that are provided in each of those cases may have a very different feel and very different specific requirements. Great. What I have here is simply a quick rundown. You'll see from almost a year ago right up through the autumn of the number of times that we solicited input, both from the public and from the staff. The staff, as library professionals, obviously have a profound influence on the types of services that are provided and the education and experience to talk about how they can be upgraded. The community is equally important. We actually represent you. The library, its raison d'etre is to provide services to you, the community. And it's important to find out from you what are the most important of those services and how are they being provided now and how can we make them better. And you'll see over the course of time, from staff interviews to stakeholders days to public charrette meetings, and then importantly, after the public charrette meetings, we also conducted what we call We Heard You meetings, or WHY meetings, to use the acronym. These were actually a chance to talk about, before we've designed anything, the priorities and the criteria that we had developed and asked you to comment on them. And what Tim was referring to earlier is we not only held 2 public meetings to do that in this room, but then left boards so that anyone performing any circulation or use of the library had another vote. It's a dot exercise. And that actually helped us to graphically see where priorities were being made about what we were going to do and what we were going to try to accomplish. So as we move forward with thinking about what was important, we had a lot of terrific quotes, and some of them are very typical, things you hear about a library, but some are not just cliches. And in fact, there are some things that you might see here that didn't exist in the library of your youth, for example. Innovative and creative programming. Libraries tend to be very good at events. That's something they've always, story hours have always been done and that kind of thing. But the idea of what libraries are doing now with maker spaces and the creation of local history and genealogy, or actually building something, as well as an expanded collection type from your very typical media and book collection, which is sort of the brand of a library, to a great deal of other ephemera. Some libraries loan snowshoes or sewing machines or prom gowns or whatever it may be. And libraries can be very good at reaching out to the community for different things like that. And sometimes it's just the exposure to these other things. So you can see, I love to see people doing different things, or the people care about Gilpin. These have a profound effect on how we see our lives in our community. So moving forward, to put numbers into a more palatable graphic so that you can see where we're going with these, we took information from over 2,000 responses, 2,072 responses overall, from both public meetings and the charts that are left in the library. And we've actually broken them up by what staff and public have talked about as priorities, But so that you get a sense and that I can hit the highlights of the largest of these priorities, you can see that from the staff who work here every day, spend long periods of time here every day, there are certain crucial issues. A robust and imaginative children's room. Many children's libraries now have changed greatly, even in the last 20 years. We've gone from creating a children's room to actually defining within those spaces, not just program and reading areas, but drop-in play areas is another thing. We've broken up the collection now in most libraries so that it's not just children's, but it's actually toddlers and babies, picture books, early readers, and so forth. So it's not one department, it's actually a series or a conglomeration of different abilities and desires. An improved service desk. The staff obviously is focused on providing the best possible services to the patrons, and how that happens is typically at a desk. We don't even call them circulation desks in our office, we call them PPSs, patron points of service. That is the point where the transaction and the conversation actually happens, and we want to make the staff as accessible as possible. Makerspace and hands-on programming, which I just talked about. A third space, meaning in urban design, we talk about third space as a place you live, a place you work, and there's a third space that we all own collectively. Some parks are a good example of a third space. Schools could also be, but they have a very limited demographic. But a library is a perfect example of a third space that an entire community uses. I'm going to jump over to the public space discussion, and some of the big issues here that were developed by public response, the priorities, safety and accessibility. So I was very glad to hear the town supervisor talk about one of the key comments that came up throughout the process, which was, how do we make access to and from the library site, not just the building, but the site itself, safer and easier? And anyone who's white-knuckled it through the intersection at the end of Mercy Care knows exactly what we're talking about there. So it's wonderful when we can work together, when various institutions can try and make improvements like that. So we're going to work very hard to try and make sure those things happen. You'll see a few other things that came up. Indoor reading niches, that showed up here and here as well. These are places that people own in a library, a space that you can actually spend time and enjoy being. A library is not just a transactional institution where you go, get something, and leave. That can happen. But libraries are also very good as places to study, to do research, to spend time, to take your children, and so forth. Again, the children's room got a double-digit response, and we have some in the indoor reading niches, as I mentioned, but one of the other big ones was a cafe. The opportunity to actually have a space, this ties into the third space idea as well, a space you call home. And this isn't to say that it competes with a Starbucks or anything else that's up and down the main road, but within this space now, somebody who's studying or spending time where their kids are in a program have a place to be, have a place to actually enjoy refreshments, and in fact, sometimes cafes become teen spaces by themselves, whether you've done a teen space or not. So these were some key things that have come out of that conversation. If we can move to the next slide. In the resources, you can see, again, from staff, improved staff workspace, and this comes out of a desire to be able to serve the public as well as possible. The PPS staff area, which is at that end of the building, is maybe 10, 12 feet wide and 30 feet long. If you can imagine trying to work with, 12, 15 people in that space and do a good job and provide service to the public, because the public can be exhausting, right? We need to be able to give them the best possible service and efficiently. The character of the building, this came up repeatedly as well. The building, we think of it as young and relatively new, but it's a quarter century old. When you put 25 years into perspective and the amount of things that can happen over the course of the life of a building, that's something we want to talk about. And perhaps make it a little less institutional. If we want to make it a place that people are proud of and that represents this community, then the colors, the textures, and some of the materials might be upgraded in such a way to make them more comfortable. So restoration of finishes, the character, natural light is an opportunity, and so forth. Improved restroom access was another common comment. And you'll see from the public, again, 2,000 and some responses, the collection itself is one of the concerns. And this goes back to the idea that books and the media and the traditional collection are sort of the brand of the library. And as we look at these responses and what some of the individual comments were, we recognize that it's not just a question about the size of the collection. In fact, the size of the collection is slightly large for a community of your size based on New York State standards. It's not overly large, but it's certainly in that range. I think the bigger issue, based on the comments and our analysis of them, is that the way the collection is accessed by the public is the primary issue. That is, how are we displaying it? We have a very traditional sense in the way the library is laid out right now, very tall stacks that create tunnels and a variety of aisles that are narrow, and your ability to do what we call a serendipitous browse, to go through the stacks and find something that might just catch your eye or be of interest to you, is not exactly there. And so we're going to look at ways to improve the display of the collection as it is, and increase the areas for the certain key ones that matter the most. Traditional programs, this room in particular, got a tremendous number of comments on its appropriateness for providing various things that happen throughout the year. And non-traditional programs is something that interested a great number of people as well, the things that libraries are doing now they didn't used to do.
Rick.
Yep, I'm sorry. So as we look at these and combine, and we see some of the big numbers, staff workspace, safety and accessibility, the collection, of course, the cafe, the reading niches, these were all some of the big keys, and these bubbles are proportionate to their response numbers in the big numbers. And then when we combine both staff and public input, you can see these were the big hits. And these were the things we wanted to focus on as we developed a plan for how to reuse the library, how to set it up in a way that made sense for this community. So having said that, we're working obviously in a space with Western Avenue, Mercy Care Lane, and the library property as it is now, and the two adjacent parcels here that are also owned and potentially provide us some relief to some of the issues we face, whether it's the use of site, parking, access, and so forth. And then, of course, we just had the conversation about connecting to Winding Brook Drive and then out to Western for a safer egress and access to the site. Okay? So as we looked at the facility issues, we also did an extensive examination of all the various systems of the building, from the finishes to the structure, the floors, walls, ceilings, windows and doors, and so forth. And we know that there are several things that need upgrades just because of the nature of their age. The brick masonry, for example, the restroom improvements. You know, one of the examples, if you go into the restrooms, it's very rare these days that we specify tile floors in civic institutions, in restrooms, with a 2x2 tile. And the reason for that is that the proportion of grout to tile across the floor is tremendous. Grout is the hardest part of that to clean and keep looking clean. We won't even get into hygiene. We don't want to know anything about that, right? So having said that, though, you'll see, and in fact, if you go into commercial institutions, you'll see larger tiles tend to be not just a trendy look, but actually create a cleaner surface that's easier to keep up to date and so forth. So we're looking at a variety of things, and I'll talk about some of the upgrades we'll be talking about as priorities. One of the big ones, though, is one of the primary architectural features of the building, the skylight monitor that runs down the length of the main axis. And in fact, if I stand centered on this window and look through the center line of those doors and the center of that window, I actually end up looking right through the center line of the window beyond the far end. That's an important architectural axis that actually doesn't get noticed by many people because it's not the one that you're frequently following. You actually come perpendicular to that when you enter the building. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. But along that rooftop monitor, the skylight, there is some maintenance that's necessary there because of its age regarding the sealants and the way that the glass panels fit. Okay. So I flipped the plan here just so that it matches all of the drawing plans that we were given. Actually have north at the bottom of the page, which is counterintuitive. But I want to keep everything consistent so we're all looking the same way. So Western Avenue is here, Mercy Care is here, and you see the building and you see the parking lot. And one of the key issues here, aside from the aesthetic of a large asphalt lot that does the opposite of welcoming people to a civic institution, is a safety question. Anybody who gets out of a car anywhere in this parking lot has to walk through a lane of traffic to get to the building. Now think of a library, the demographics of people who use libraries are frequently the elderly, very young children, parents with strollers. The more we can create designated paths that are safe and controlled crossings of lanes of traffic, the better it is for everybody. The better it is for the liability of the library, as well as the aesthetic. Breaking up a large sea of asphalt is a desirable situation in most communities. Most planning boards actually require that we think about ways of creating green islands and so forth within the space. The other thing I'll mention is that the location of the book drop here, while it makes sense because it is on the driver's side, which is obviously a necessity when you have a book, an outdoor book drop, actually creates some problems because it creates a bottleneck at the exit to the library parking lot. And I'm sure many of you have been stuck behind somebody who's trying to reach out into a book drop, and book drops have not changed their design significantly in the last couple of decades, although we've changed our driving habits, haven't we? So you might be in a Prius, in a compact hybrid, or you might be in an SUV. Where do you put the height of that book drop to make that work, for example? And now somebody's fumbling with that, and you've got a line of traffic behind you. The second thing that happens here is people come through here, and because there's no break between the main entrance to the library and this entrance, people move pretty fast sometimes. And remember, we've had everybody getting out of cars and coming to the building across that lane, and that can be a dangerous situation. And then thirdly, I mentioned as well that the identity of the building is lost because your eye doesn't actually see it from the road. It could be anything back here. It could be medical suites or a dentist's office. What says that that's a civic building to us from the street? And there are many traditional ways of defining civic architecture, but we have a 25-year-old building to work with and fit with the context of the architecture here and how it fits into the drive-by, if you will. So move to the next slide. These are some suggestions that we're talking about for improving that front. We're not even inside the building yet, but from the building, creating an island or peninsula that runs the length of the parking lot, that has trees and benches to break it up, but most importantly, a sidewalk that runs from Western Avenue, from the connection that most people have to access to the building, all the way up to the entrance of the building. And it's on axis with that as well. So now we have these two crossing axes, if you want to get into architectural terminology. But having said that, people getting out of vehicles in any of these locations can go two-way sidewalk and then cross at a designated spot. It also allows us to put handicap parking in these areas with more proximity to the main entry rather than over here. And most significantly, we've taken the book drop and moved it to this location. So now somebody would come all the way past and drop off books on the left over here, and we're not bottlenecking at this area. By ramping up to the other area, we've avoided putting another curb cut onto Western Avenue. Why double the problems that we already have with access to Western? And having done that, we can increase another 50 or so parking spaces on this upper lot and connect down. Now, the actual location of this may change. There's a site wall here now, bless you, a retaining wall, because this is higher, and in fact hides this end of the building. So there may be a better location for this, but we're developing the civil engineering to think about that. The other improvement I wanted to talk about with the electronics related to the sign that are out here and a graphic presence on Western Ave is also electric recharging stations for electric vehicles. Libraries can be at the forefront of some of those ideas about improved efficiency in our overall community. So breaking it up with green space, making safer access, creating safer book drop, which is also then closer for staff to bring things in and out from the book drop. Many of you may not think of that, but in the slush and snow, that's actually a pretty big deal, moving a book cart through the snow into the entry. And then creating overflow parking as well, so that we increase the capacity. So as we look at the existing building, we've come up that walkway, and this is as it lays out right now. This is actually from the construction documents about 25 years ago when it was built. And you can see that axis I was talking about, from this room all the way down and through. But you actually enter this way, you come in, and then the barrier of the circulation desk is there. One of the comments that many people had was that the circulation desk was difficult to maneuver, and that the plaza area out back was almost invisible. People didn't recognize it behind that wall. And that you actually come in and then make a left, and then all these stacks block your view. If you look to that help desk, what do you see? You see the desk itself and then this wall behind you. What's beyond that is sort of a mystery, and it isn't laid out for intuitive use. We want libraries to be able to be used by patrons and staff very effectively, and it means that people can find their way. We got a lot of good press about the meeting rooms and their capacity and the things they do, but we know that the restrooms need upgrades, and we have this long, narrow hallway of death here that just sort of goes back to an exit door. It does have a bulletin board on it, that's something you pass by on your way to somewhere else. How do we make this a more effective area of public intersection? And then additionally, we have a few of these study rooms around. How can we make them easier to secure and supervise, better access for people using them, and one of the most common features that came up again and again, how do we have a variety of meeting room sizes? This is an excellent room for 60 to 70 people, up to 150 people. But you wouldn't put a 5-person meeting in here either. So having a variety of different sizes is important as we go forward. So Tim, if we move forward. This is the scheme as it currently sits that the committee has been developing over the last several months. Since September basically till now, we've gone through several iterations. You may recall at the December meeting that we presented the potential of a small addition at the end on the east that might have 2 stories that connects to that upper level, that would do different things. And in fact, we've actually backed away from that as a committee and focused on the specific priorities that had been asked for. So remember all those graphics and bubbles that I was showing you before. We decided let's look at the exact things that people have asked for and that our staff needs to do the best job possible. So I'm going to start actually on the west end and work my way this way. The meeting rooms, the large one, remains essentially as it is. It's a beautiful space. In terms of acoustics, we actually don't want to mess with it because it does have excellent acoustics. The one modification we're talking about making over here is the introduction of a door by which we'll lose a few feet of hanging space. But what this does is it allows performers or presenters to enter the space at this end, at the presentation end, rather than coming down the wedding aisle in the middle of a talk or conversation. So that's the one modification here. We keep the kitchenette, the storage, all of that works well. In the small meeting room, the one next door, we've actually talked about enclosing that stage end at one end and making storage there so that this can become an adult makerspace as well. Makerspaces can be very flexible. In other words, we don't have to do specific things in the space, but we have to have lots of storage and the ability to roll things in and out. So this meeting room can also do double duty as an adult program space and makerspace. And you'll see that we opened up the lobby outside. This is one of the most important buildings or rooms in the building, and yet outside we've got this narrow, sort of low and dark cave. By opening that up, we've created sort of a town center from which a mobile kiosk in the middle might have some benches and seats on it, might have computers by which you can reserve rooms, you can check in or check out books. All these things can happen in a space. We kept display cabinets, but opened this up into a larger breakout area for the meeting rooms, for another small conference room, meeting room for 10 to 12 people that we introduced in this space, and for a perpetual book sale. So now the Friends of the Library or any group can actually run a book sale that is in a permanent space.
Hey, Paul, I'm just going to jump in and say that pink meeting room that you just showed, the main intent is for public use of that space because part of the feedback was we don't have enough meeting rooms.
Exactly.
So,
right. So now we have the large meeting room, the small meeting room, this extra conference room. We did put doors on both ends of it, so it can be locked off here and used by the public. And as similar to the feature you have now, but we've expanded upon it, we can lock off the library proper here, and we have access to 1, 2, 3 meeting rooms, plus the book sale room, plus a cafe that takes over the one corner. All of those can be open when the library itself is closed. So in essence, it's actually 4 different meeting type spaces plus the book sale room, all accessible from this central area. As you come in, we've actually created a back of house book drop. So now instead of that transaction happening at the circulation desk, the staff at the circ desk can focus on patrons, books get dropped through slots and get dealt with by staff and processed back of house. As we enter the library, remember that access we talked about, we now come in and we're actually looking down the length of that spine. So we're taking that architectural feature that exists, making it more prominent, and in fact making it very flexible because all of these pieces that you see in here, which are stacks and tables and chairs, are all mobile. The stacks are lower, meaning we can see over them, and by being mobile, we've actually created another meeting space. This isn't something you would do weekly or even monthly, but a few times a year, these can be moved out of this space, the stacks get shoved up and in between the other aisles, and in fact this tall open space becomes a gala type space, or what did we call it the other day, a home run event can be held in a large space like this, and it's under that main piece of architecture. The mobility of all these these shelving and seating units also allows us to shift them around and change them as patterns change. So this collection is modified, different pieces can be moved to different areas. You'll see another meeting room by taking that end of where PPS and local history is now, a series of study rooms, and then local history at this end. We've actually taken the compressed storage, moved it to this end, and basically doubled the size of the local history room by doing so. So we have a series of study rooms that are now conjoined, and that means they're easier to supervise. And we've taken the circulation staff, let them focus on patron service, created a back-of-house office. Many of you have noticed if you go in and you go to that main circ desk, there's a very busy and open space behind you. And it's cluttered. It's the nature of what they're doing. Now that's all back-of-house space, and the desk here focuses on the patron. By keeping all of these things low, it also means that from the circ desk, the help desk is visible, but they're now at opposite ends of that open space. So the PPS staff, who function in the children's library as well as the adult collection, are now more central to their overall space. And you can see a PPS office, a help desk for adults, a help desk for children's, a young adult space, which is more than twice the size of the existing young adult space, and then PPS back-of-house spaces, which have exterior windows and interior borrowed light windows into the young adult areas. So now we have that implied supervision as well. From workspaces, staff can actually see the areas where people are gathered. We've opened up the area here so that access to the plaza is now more feasible if we develop anything there. And then at this end, this is the addition. This is about a 6,000 square foot addition. We've gone out into the area where right now there's a lawn area on the east side of the building, and taken the children's department from here and basically put it here. And that allowed us to expand the adult collection into this space and do these things. Now we have a large program room that's more than twice the size of the existing children's program room, another common comment that we received from many people. And we created the drop-in play area. Again, this is an unstructured area. Parents can bring kids, they can spend time, but the whole area has a gatekeeper function at the children's help desk as you come in of where you're going. You'll also see the introduction of some restrooms, a staff restroom and a public restroom, and 2 family restrooms. One of the most popular things we do in children's libraries, particularly for families that have multiple kids. One sibling needs to use the restroom. Do you pack everybody up and move them to the other end of the library to use the public restrooms that are out here? By doing family restrooms in these areas, we can keep them closer to where they're actually spending time. We also added a family restroom right off of this, where the existing main restrooms are. So now we have that expanded capacity as well. So a unisex, large, accessible restroom that allows small families to use that. And then within the administrative area, we've kept many things the same, but we've upgraded the administrative area and taken the treasurer's office and put it on an exterior wall to get natural light at windows, and there's still a connection then from that space. It did mean that the processing space in the back got a little smaller, but we had identified that as an area that could sacrifice a little bit of space based on the current staffing. Within the children's library, again, we come all the way down this axis. We have a large collection area, computers, tables, seating areas, 1.5 chairs for parents or grandparents to sit with children, as well as the other functions. And you'll also see storage set up throughout the building in various locations. And then outside, at the end of that axis that comes up on the parking area, a cafe plaza space can be introduced. That means people can actually come outside, sit at tables under umbrellas at certain times of the year, and actually create a dynamism or a more open atmosphere on the outside of the building that's more pleasing for passersby. So actually, really quickly, let me just run through a couple of things for you. What this does, this is a 6,000 square foot addition on a 27,000 square foot building. But what it allowed us to do is to actually increase the adult collection space by 28%. And in doing, even though we've increased the space, we've lowered many of the stacks in that area. So now it's a much less oppressive kind of space with tunnels, for example. The children's area is 32% larger in this scheme. The program space is 62% larger than the current program space. The young adult area grew more than double. It's 102% larger, and the local history space is 106% larger. and the staff space for PPS is 149% larger. So you'll see most of the key areas that we had identified in the needs are areas we focused on by doing a very modest addition that allowed us to move things around. So Tim, if we can move to the next slide. So what did we hit here? Did we improve access to and from Route 20? That's something we're obviously going to be working with the town about. The narrow access lane for vehicle speed and what happens at the drop-off area. Handicap parking. Improve site lighting in the greenscape and soften the impact, those trees and everything we were introducing. We revised the book drop location. We're going to coordinate with town sidewalk initiatives and, in fact, bus routing as well, and expand the presence of the outdoor plaza. We sort of hit all of those marks. Within the programmatic areas for ACS, we rethought the CERT desk. We separated the back of house space. We expanded the self-check potential, where that gets located, and how the desks work. All the queuing and sorting, you can imagine, we've been through, there have been several members of staff on our committee who have continually upgraded our thoughts on how we laid that out. Senior clerk areas in ACS and the clerk and page efficiency, all those relate to that layout. Within, next slide, the PPS area, we rethought the help desk. We gave it better proximity to the spaces they actually work in. In other words, it's central to where they are rather than at one end of the building, but it keeps them consolidated. Quick access materials are the things that happen near the desk. We can upgrade all of how that lays out. The Gilder Lab makerspace, can we go back one slide? Or two slides. I didn't mention
go back?
the arrow going the other direction. Yep, one more. Thank you. The program space here, because of the built-in storage around the perimeter, would also be a makerspace for children and young adult programs. So you can see that young adult has access to the program space and children have access to the program space. So what we did, instead of creating one makerspace that's trying to do everything, we've left the opportunity for two different types of makerspace. That's not to say that children can't use this one, but it's less likely adults would use this one because of its location. So I'm sorry, if we could jump back ahead again.
Back to here.
Yes, and then the collection displays, again, all those sight lines have been improved simply by lowering the stacks, and then our flexibility has increased dramatically as well by being able to move them around. And then staff meeting areas, I won't go into all the details, but we've laid out all those spaces specific to staff requests for direct access to natural light, as well as conjoined work areas. And then if we go forward one more. Creating a more welcoming entry, the reading niches, I didn't point them out specifically, but there were a whole series of them throughout the building. A much more robust children's room, including a drop-in playtime. The gallery and performance and meeting spaces, not just here, but the town center space that we created out there. We didn't do anything about exercise reading bikes. That's still on our list. We may find a space for them somewhere. The maker spaces, and then more meeting spaces that are hospitable to seniors and teens and young adults. These are all things that we've focused on. Okay. So overall, how do we get to this scheme? Obviously, there's a cost associated with this. And keeping in mind, we've looked at this strictly from a needs basis. In other words, we weren't backing into anything related to the context of what happened in 2012. We were looking at this specific to the things we've been discussing as a committee, but also as a community in our various meetings. So looking at the cost of something like this, we looked at the project costs as they relate to the various aspects. The site preparation and development at about $535. The existing building system repairs and upgrades are about $1.5 million. Building construction within this footprint, in other words, things happening inside the building, about $835,000. The addition, about $1.7 million. And then one of the question marks here is fire protection, which I'll mention in a minute, at $404,000. With contingencies, obviously when we do work on a building, we need to make sure that we're prepared for things that may have been behind walls that nobody knew about, or underground that no one had told us or remembered. There are things that will happen during construction. We need to keep contingencies for that. We've provided an allowance for furnishings for not just the new space, but to upgrade the furnishings in the existing public spaces and some of the staff areas. And then all the soft costs that go into the various fees, the bonding and so forth, the testing, information technology upgrades and data distribution, And the total project cost comes to about $6.8 million when you add all of those things together. Now, the things that still haven't been discussed are the offsets to those. That is, a capital account potentially, the foundation or Friends of the Library contribution, a fundraising campaign, bullet aid potentially from politicians has been very generous in certain libraries we've worked on. The Division of Library Development grants are typically one of the primary sources of supplementing the funding for library capital projects. And then there are a series of other miscellaneous but smaller items like NYSERDA rebates and other grants and so forth. So at some point we'll be defining which of these have numbers and values that can be subtracted from that prior to determining what an amount to be funded through referendum might be. So we would hope to offset that number somewhat with some of these pieces as we discuss them. Now I should mention a few things in this 6.8 number. The construction manager right now is not included. A construction manager is somebody who during the course of construction is providing on-site supervision and coordination. There's been talk about trying to provide a coordinated effort with the school district's project that Tim mentioned earlier, and that would also then potentially include the sharing of a construction manager's services. It won't cost nothing, but it would be significantly less if it's part of an overall school project than if we were doing it separately. The mechanical upgrades to the existing building are not a number in here. We do have mechanical work in the new addition, obviously, but there's a separate project that's in for grant consideration probably this coming year that upgrades this building. So that's a separate line item and it's not there. And the fire protection system that I mentioned earlier is also included in that. Now, my fear is, and I haven't had a chance to review what those documents are yet, we're going to be talking about that. I have all of these numbers are very conservative, meaning they are healthy numbers that we may refine over time, but I wanted to make sure that we were covered even now. So that number may actually come down significantly if a big piece of it is being taken on in the mechanical project that's currently happening. And then lastly, hazardous materials. Because of the age of the building, it's unlikely that we're going to have asbestos or lead issues. The most likely contaminants are going to be things like PCPs in light fixtures or sealants and caulks. And if you recall, one of the big items that I was talking about is upgrading the sealants and caulks on the skylight system. So that is potentially going to be there, but I think we have generous enough numbers in there to cover those types of things. The other building improvements within the building, aside from the resealing and repairing of the skylight, are masonry cleaning and repair across the breadth of the exterior of the building. Exterior wood repair, you'll notice there's a transom of wood that goes around that is decaying in many locations. Replacement of windows and restoration of windows and doors in many locations. Toilet room improvements, obviously, and then finishes and upgrades throughout the building of various finishes, not just colors, but potentially adding textures and better lighting and so forth. So bottom line, next slide, I think. Okay, well, let's come back to it. So that's where we are for the project described. It has been a tremendous amount of work with this committee. Those of you who are on the committee know we've been through, I don't know how many versions of plans that we've continued to refine. And most of them have actually sort of brought the project back in. In other words, tailored it very specifically to the needs assessment that had been done, rather than making it larger and larger. So as we compare this even to what had happened in 2012, we're at roughly half the cost 6 years later. So even accounting for inflation. So that's sort of where we are as a committee. I was asked to update everyone, and we're thrilled that there's a public interest in this as well. And what we've tried to do is figure out how we can accommodate so many people who are interested and make that input efficient. So as has been discussed, I think what we're going to try and do is set up some specific meetings for you as a group so that it can sort of be a large de facto committee that we can go through this and talk about some of your comments in detail. But for now, if anyone has any questions or thoughts.
Well, I would just encourage anybody who immediately had an eye moment
Yes.
to share it with you now, even before this big meeting. The one thing that I wanted to share, that one of the members shared with me, they asked the question, why aren't we doing the second floor? Because they said you could put all the administrative offices and IT over there, and that would free up more meeting room space, which seemed to be one of the big
that's an excellent question. For those of you who didn't hear it, one of the questions was, why aren't we doing a second floor? And could we move administrative to that area? One of the key design aspects was making sure that we were trying to spread staff through the building as a means of supervising each of the various areas. Tim, for example, does a patrol periodically, right? Where you go through the building and see what's going on. So by having PPS here, and ACS here, and administration, it allows us to spread through the building. If we locate, and some libraries do this, they consolidate all the staff in one location, we tend not to be fans of it because it sometimes creates a bunker mentality where they're separated from the rest of the library. And in fact, that's somewhat been a comment as is about how accessible the administrative part of the staff is. As we looked at a second floor here as a committee, I think we kept finding ourselves almost trying to find something to put up there. Something that could go, that wasn't going to require supervision, that wasn't going to be an issue related to security, and that access to it wouldn't be as big a problem. And then, of course, we're creating by that second floor the need for egress stairs and elevator and so forth. So in the end, we came back around. It's an excellent question, but we came back around to making sure that we were focusing on the things that had been asked for. By keeping most of the administration where it is, it actually saves us money. There were other schemes where we moved administrative areas around. But if we don't have to move, let's not move something for the sake of moving it. If it works, let's keep it. And then you said meeting space was at a premium, of course. So now we've got large meeting room, small meeting room, conference room, this meeting room, program room, the cafe. We created other types of meeting spaces. But it's certainly worth discussing as we go on in terms of the proportion of the overall investment. Yep.
This is my question.
Okay.
I've seen this so many times and I never thought of this. Why did you not square off the children's area? Because, you know, when you have all the construction people there and everybody there,
Right.
why not take advantage of that extra 3 or 4 feet or whatever that is?
We might want to, we can play with that. And in fact, this is a conceptual design, so you can certainly do that. One of the issues you have in construction is that when you try to bring one plane to match flush with another plane of construction, so say we're constructing a brick wall right in line with this brick wall rather than setting it back, that can sometimes be it can look awkward because the bricks don't match exactly, they have different patterns. Even if you tried to get the same brick, it's been 25 years. So very often, we do this in historic buildings, would be more prominent, that you would try and keep the corners of the existing building so you can see the context of the original. Here, it's more a question of making sure that we have the space we need within, and then just pulling it back to make construction easier. But that could grow 2 feet that way, that could grow 2 feet that way, that could happen. I wouldn't want to make it exactly flush, though.
But the reason I'm saying that those extra feet could be more,
Yes.
studies.
Or slightly more collection. We've increased collection size, but yes, you're right. You can always use the space, that's absolutely true. So think of this as a conceptual layout, but you're absolutely right. The details of how far set back that is, it doesn't have to be 6 feet, it might be 2 feet or 3 feet. You're absolutely right.
Because one of the problems with the original, with the library we have, is we can't do anything on the second floor because of the construction.
Right.
Will this addition be strong enough so if 10 years down the road, if needed to have more space, there could be a second floor?
It's a good question, and some buildings are built that way. I will say I have experience, I did this once, I was working, it was actually for a school district, this is very early in my career, and I was told this was built so that we could do a second floor above it, so the structure's fine, you're ready to go. Well, as we examined it, what we found is that between the time when that was designed and built and the time that I was working on it, the building codes had changed. And so although at the time it could have expanded onto the second floor, now it didn't meet the seismic and other structural requirements of that. Now that's not to say they're going to keep changing all the time, but you do run that risk sometimes of spending that extra money and not seeing the immediate advantage to it. The other issue to that then is potentially when that does happen, you've got construction going on overhead, and that can be very, very disruptive. It's not impossible, but it is something to think about. I think as a committee, and those of you who are on the committee, feel free to jump in, we did discuss that second floor for a long time. I mean, we had several schemes that used a second floor. I think in the interest of efficiency and maintaining a reasonable budget, we kept coming back to what do we need here. But excellent question.
I want to continue with the board, and then I want to get public input. Does anyone else on board questions?
Any committee members remember anything that I didn't, it was a whirlwind run through here, but.
One thing you didn't mention with the outside doors to get to the outside space.
Yes, okay. And that's an excellent, Chris mentions that we spent a bit of time talking about access, not just to the plaza area, but the outdoor lawn areas, which we'd like to take more advantage of. There is an infiltration and retention pond at this end, or not a pond, but depression area. But having said that, there are lawn areas that are opportunities to go from children's or even from adult out to the plaza or out to those. The other reason we've added these is not actually a building code reason. The New York State Building Code has requirements for fire, egress, and safety. But many libraries are going through other danger situations, active shooters and things like that. And creating more means of egress, whether they're required for fire safety or not, is actually an excellent idea to prevent people being cornered in parts of the building. So doors like this have been added. There's one you mentioned, Tim, this last time off the children's room. But having said that, they are typically alarmed. They're on panic push bars, obviously, but they're alarmed, and New York State Building Code allows us to put them on a 15-second delay. That's important, particularly in the children's area. You don't want children rushing out the door, or even worse, an adult grabbing a child and rushing out the door. But having said that, it's something that we can add fairly safely. And by doing the reading nooks along here and having these doors, we're hoping to open this area up. Right now, that's all behind that circulation desk. So that outdoor plaza area, which I think is what Chris was getting at, becomes a more accessible piece, taking the mylar off of the windows there that are necessary for shade, building a trellis outside, for example, that would provide the same shade but be an architectural interest point. You know, those are all things that are details we would get to.
This is actually a question for Peter.
Oh.
One of the dreams or visions that the library board over the years has always had is that paper road in the back be regifted to the library, so that if you go out those doors, you could use that as green space or picnic tables or whatever. So I just throw it out to you, because we're finally making progress on the road, and if that ever happens, that would be a dream come true.
True, but I have to say that the plan B is using that, potentially as a one-way to get to Winding Road. But again, the preference is to convert Mercer Lane to a town road. The other issue too is, if you actually look at the subdivision map, prior to building this library, it clearly indicates on it that it was supposed to be dedicated to the town for purposes of road. It actually says it right out on the subdivision map. Now, things can change, but planning board have to basically just negate that and look what we're going to transfer.
If I understood you correctly, one of the things you were saying, as you're trying to create the connection to Winding Brook, if that doesn't come through, this would be the second
It'd be
option
plan
to
B.
try and make that happen.
Right, but we just couldn't do it on its own. We'd have,
Sure.
we get 3/4 of the way.
Right.
Which is
That close. Right. Understood. Okay, that's good.
Great. Any more board members? Well, first, I wanted to thank Paul. It's very difficult working with a volunteer board. We all have different hours, and Paul has been phenomenal with his ability to come out. You know, whenever we ask him, it's been great. It's been a real pleasure working with you. I know it is a pain, so I wanted to appreciate everything you do, and I know it's not easy because he's here at night most of the time. It's a struggle. So thank you very much.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Now, as far as public comment, I'd love to get questions. I don't want to discourage comments, but I have some comments on this as well, and if every single person gave a comment, we would be here for a while. So while I'm not discouraging comments, certainly feel free. I really would love questions for Paul. So, go ahead.
Why do we need to bring food service into the library? You're dealing with deliveries, you're dealing with trash, you're dealing with potential spills. I go to libraries all over the state. I don't know any other library that has food service. Why are we doing that?
Well, it came from public comments, first of all. That was one of the priorities you'll recall that were double-digit requests by the public. It is fairly common, actually, in a lot of libraries. Saratoga Springs is an example of one with a very successful cafe. But what it does is it allows for another meeting space. And maybe I should clarify, too. When you say food service, they're not baking there, they're not cooking there. This is coffee, donuts, bagels, perhaps sandwiches. It's light food service. It's certainly not a commercial kitchen or any such thing. But what it is doing is trying to provide an opportunity for people to find their place of comfort within the building. And often you see travel mugs and so forth are here right now. People like having a beverage or a snack with them when they spend time in a civic building. So that's where it came from. One of the advantages to this space is we would make it in a way such that it could be converted to something else. If the cafe idea did not pan out, then another meeting space can be created here very easily, and it is accessible off the lobby or off the library. So imagine somebody's doing yoga or something like that. The library's not even open yet in the morning. They can come grab a cup of coffee as well, chat with friends, or wait for the library to open. That was the idea. It did have some legs when it came to public residents, but obviously there are lots of things to relate to it.
Frank, a couple comments I would add to that are not really my own comments. They came from, the first one came from an 18-year-old student who was here at one of our public design charrettes, and she said, you don't even really need to build a teen space. The cafe will be the teen space. They go to Starbucks, they go to Dunkin' Donuts, that's where young people hang out. The other is what another patron in another public meeting called the Barnes & Noble effect. It is not uncommon in public libraries in the capital region to walk into a library and have fewer people there than when you walk into Barnes & Noble. And there's two differences. One is they have food, and the other is they charge for everything. So we don't want to, sell books here, but well, although we do want to sell used books, that's sort of part of our mission. But people want to stay for a little while. Kids come to study. So that's the thinking behind it. I think Paul just said, if it were not embraced by the community, it's going to be designed in such a way that it could be turned into something else. So.
It's an excellent question, and each community has to sort of decide that on their own. The key is creating something flexible enough that we can shift with the needs as they are. If it were a small town and there was a coffee shop across the street and people would walk, but to go get coffee from here, you get in a car, you drive someplace. So that's where it was coming from anyway, but it's an excellent question and one we should keep thinking about as we talk about it.
And related to that, we are, even though we're getting some new sidewalks, we're very much an automobile destination. And so if you want a nice tall cup of coffee, you've got to bring it with you, basically. I mean, we do have a coffee machine. I might be the only staff member who regularly uses it. It's not the best coffee. So we're trying to offer something.
I have a related question to that. So that purple thing, is that the cafe? It looks like it's got two.
This is the cafe.
And so if you go there and you buy a coffee and you sit around, do you have books in there with you from the shelves? And then what happens when you want to take that coffee and go to the children's section or something?
Right. That's a policy question. In many libraries, you are allowed to have food in parts of the library. Things like we're standing right now on carpet tile, which are easier to maintain in areas where drinks may spill, for example. And so some libraries have made the calculation that we would rather everybody be comfortable, spend time here, make it a destination, and it's worth replacing a carpet tile here and there once in a while, as opposed to banning food in a specific place.
That is the current policy, Elizabeth, is you can eat and drink whatever you want, wherever you want in the library.
Now, I would say that in the local history area, the idea here would be to create a more secure space. In fact, the collection in that space we would also likely put behind closed, lockable cabinet doors, not just for security, but because of the sprinkler system, we don't want pieces there. We can replace James Patterson books, but if there's a diary or a Bible from the history of the town, that's something we need to make sure we're protecting in different ways. So there are staffing and policy questions that do come out of it. You're right.
Also, I wanted to just share quickly too that during my time going to college, I did an internship at Our Lady Mercy Life Center, and then was actually an employee there for a period of time. And you had 4 floors with staff, and they get a half-hour break, and they got to try and get out here on the road, get to some location. This also provides opportunity for them to maybe walk over here. You also have all the residents over there, and family come visit them, potentially come over here and get a book out with them or spend some time with them as well.
Sorry, this is not a question or more of a comment, it just occurred to me, because in answer to you. I have 2 little boys, and sometimes they come here as a mom. They come here, they have a program, and when they come out, sometimes they're so hungry they just want a snack. And on days when it snows, I mean, it just occurred to me, but on days that it snows, or it's sleet outside and it's, terrible driving conditions, a cafe would ease the, you know, the pressure you have to give them something. And I don't think they're gonna be wandering with it around the library. They eat and basically they're done. So that's another plus for it.
It's funny you said it. Saratoga Library is one of our clients, and if you saw the granola clusters racing off the shelves after story hour every day, it's amazing. I don't know how they restock
They're
it fast enough.
hungry, they're
That's exactly right. And that gives you the opportunity to spend more time at the library and not have to go out. What's the likelihood you'll come back having left? So that's fine. I think there was a question back there. Yes, ma'am?
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry.
can I just ask that you start off with your name? Do you have a question? Yeah.
No, my name is Jennifer Stock. I just have a comment that when you're talking about parents or grandparents coming in with toddlers, that you would almost wish there would be an entrance that would allow them to park closer and come in so that they're going to be much closer to the facilities that they're looking for. Right now, you've got one main entrance, and that's a trick and a half when you're talking small children coming into a library.
Okay, that's an interesting point. The proximity of the children's area to the main entry and whether there's a secondary entrance, it would, if the children's desk is manned at all times, there's the potential to add an entry at that end that can be supervised by that. That is something interesting to think about. So we'll consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Bailey, as a grandparent who is somewhat handicapped, I would hope that if you had some chairs that are a little higher in that children's area, so that perhaps it would be more comfortable for the grandparents to sit,
Yes.
especially disabled ones.
In fact, as you'll recall, we have a budget in for furnishings, and in fact,
Right.
we go through in a fair amount of detail and look at the uses of every single space, and you're absolutely right. Children's areas are not just low toddler seats, so you have to think that through. Excellent point.
Go ahead.
Allison Swanson. I think that the person who decides on what seating will be in the library should be required to sit in one of those seats for an hour. Go to Del Mar and try and sit into those things that cave
Right.
you all in, and it can be really gruesome.
I tested out every chair out there,
Right.
and when we were built the library, so.
Yes.
And I have another little piece was, are you, in your plans, do you get rid of those beautiful wooden traditional library tables with the lovely lights on them?
We've left room for maintaining any of the existing furnishings that are worth keeping, and we would have to do an inventory of those things. But in many cases, we actually do a refinishing program on several of them to bring them up to the speed. So yes, absolutely, there would be things that would be retained if they're in good condition and salvageable. Regarding your chair comments, those of you who've heard me speak before know that in our office, we have 1 hour, 2 hour, and 3 hour chairs. We are very, very intimately involved in the specification of all the furniture. So you're absolutely right. In fact, the committee spends a fair proportion of time in working with us on developing what exactly goes into the library.
I just want to thank you, Allison. Your email was the one of the 50. You titled it Library Renewal, and that was a word we hadn't thought of yet. It's a very good email for a good word. Thank you.
I think I saw it. Yep.
My name is Cherry Neal. I used to work here at the library, and one of the questions I had was about where you're going to be putting computers, because when we built the library in '92, I think we had maybe 5 Apple IIes. No. It was, yeah, we only had a few computers. In that course of time, we've quadrupled it, probably sextupled the number, and I just want, and we had to put them in various places that were not originally designed
Yes.
for computers.
We face that question all the time. We're showing hardwired stations at various locations, typically near help desks, in order to provide assistance and to deal with print management. But having said that, we're always discussing the question of people's personal devices that have become much more prevalent, obviously, since the 90s, versus hardwired monitored computers. And the other option being laptop carts that are another way of being flexible. So some combination of those things is typically desirable. There was a while that people were talking about hardwired monitored computers going away because of becoming obsolete due to everyone's personal devices and tablets and pads and so forth. But But having said that, the software and the ability to write a report or do graphic materials or even do video editing on a large screen that has a computer with the capacity to do that kind of work is something that people actually come to the library for, because they've gotten rid of those computers at home and all they have is their phone. And if you tried to type a report or something on a tablet, it's almost impossible. So we know they're not going away completely, and we know that some combination of, obviously, Wi-Fi is available throughout the building, but all the furniture, for example, has wire management in it so that you can plug in a USB for data or repowering and so forth, as well as power. So it's absolutely something that gets considered as we develop the plan.
A quick comment about tables, the library tables. There's, in my opinion, a great reason to keep that kind of a fixture, even if it was a new table that looked the same but that had USB connections in it, because even though things change in library design, a library always feels like a library, you know, and that's, I think, one of our goals. I'm not sure we've gotten to the point where we're talking about furnishings yet.
And that's, for a master plan, that would be a lot of detail, but the point is taken, and in fact, when I was talking about refinishing tables, it's not just the, you know, waxing and staining, it's actually putting in wire management and having a doghouse or a grommet for things like power and data. So that's what I mean by refinishing, upgrading the table. And we've done it, Saugerties Public Library is a 1915 Carnegie Library. We took the tables that still have the holes for the gas lamps, for the gas pipe that came up through them. So we've been through it there. I'm sure we can manage with the tables that were put in here. You're absolutely right.
Any other comments?
Right.
Mark, yes.
First of all, Paul, thank you because it's really helpful to have an architect who really knows libraries, because there are a lot of things unique to that kind of a building you're very familiar with, and I know the folks have done a lot of work on this. One of the questions I had about public input, do we have any breakdown on where that input was coming from? My guess would be from people who have contact with the library. That's why we have their contact information. And I believe if you've got input from people who do not use the library, I suspect you have a different set of priorities. So I wonder, do we know in that public input how much of that is from people who use the library versus people who do not? Right.
I would defer to Tim. I know the invitations went out on multiple media, whether advertising in the newspaper, online, Facebook page, and I don't know, perhaps you can speak to it. So
all those things
they were
are
open
true.
invitations, certainly.
All those things are true, but Mark raises a good point, and I guess my best answer is I'm willing to keep trying and to try again. I almost thought, or I did think during this process of the last year, of trying to put out a message somehow that said, if you don't use the Guilderland Public Library, we'd like you to come to a meeting or to give us a call. But it seemed just counterintuitive enough, like they're already not getting our message. To go back to the Barnes & Noble comment, they're buying things that we will give them for free. You know, I'm willing to give it another shot, and I think you raise it at a good juncture in time, because we don't have a final plan, and you know, I know you're a communications professional, so maybe you and I can talk about a way to reach these people. Maybe
You've worked very hard to do it, by the way. So I appreciate you bringing me into this conversation, by the way.
Sure.
Over the last several months and in the fall as well. But we do have a dichotomy in this town between people who use the library and are very loyal to it, and the people who do not use it at all. And they're all representative in the district.
Yeah, they all.
So, and I know, like the research that you've done is very consistent with what I've learned from library users. There's no question that the kids program is very popular and they want to expand it. And the meeting rooms, which I utilize myself, are very significant. So I think the way the research and the needs that you've identified are no question they're consistent.
For
the people that have used the library, the question is what do the people who don't use the library think?
And that's an age-old question.
That's my second question, the cost. We're very clear about the $7 million in spending, but we had a lot of question marks about where the money was going to come from.
Right.
And it seems to me, and with grants, it takes a long time, even when you're successful with grants, to develop those grants and get the money. And I'm wondering, just how far off is this? How are you able to proceed when you have a bunch of question marks in that bottom segment, given that you really don't know where the money's going to come from?
Well, my first answer is we are not yet able to proceed, in part because we're run by the board. has to decide if we're going to take the next step. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, pretty sure you were already here, but I don't really expect, they may wish to, but I don't really expect the board to take a vote tonight on this plan. I think they might have a lot of questions for Paul and send us back to do more homework. Paul prepared the whole financial chart, okay? So we are beginning to do a little bit of work on what we have in cash reserves that we can, put against that bottom line. We don't have a final number there, but it's substantial. That will hit into that $7 million. We got really good news today. Now, you are a politician, so you know until the state budget is done, it isn't done, right? It ain't over till it's over. But the Senate and the Assembly took state library construction funds and gave them a hyper boost from $14 million to $64 million in what I think is called the unified budget proposal. But of course, we've got to get the governor's signature on that. And the $14 million that's existed in previous years has usually, that's for the whole state, and that has usually resulted in about $500,000 to $700,000 being available annually for the 29 libraries in the Upper Hudson, Albany, and Rensselaer County library system. So when you think that 5 or 6 of those libraries are as big as ours, Bethlehem, Colony, Albany, East Greenbush, etc., that is not a very big pie. But I haven't done the math yet. I mean, it was about 4 o'clock this afternoon I heard about this unified budget situation. But if it would happen to survive to the $64 million once the budget is adopted, basically, I guess the pool will be about 4 times larger. Still, Bethlehem is doing a big HVAC project. Colony is involved in a multi-year renovation. Those are the 2 that spring immediately to mind. And then pretty much every library is trying to redo a restroom or create a makerspace or something like that. So we do face a competitive environment for those. We haven't had this discussion yet, but this public library has been well supported by our senator and our assembly member in the last 5 years. I really don't know that much about it prior to that 5-year period of time. So I would think that we would want to approach those people again and see if we can find some more support. But our goal, I would think, is to build what we need rather than more than we need, and to build it as cheaply as possible. And so, as many other revenue sources as we can look at, we will. The environment we live in, I like the tax cap law as a homeowner, right? Okay, as a homeowner, I am not going to pay that much more taxes next year than this year. That's the intent and the nature of that law. As a person running a public library, it has worked out okay for the first 3 or 4 years. But is it sustainable for 30 or 40 years to limit the growth of your budget to 2% or less by law? I have a feeling that there might be a public reckoning with that 20 years from now, because libraries that aren't well led might just fall apart. Sometimes costs go up more than 2%. So it's a problematic law from that particular point of view. But the reason I bring it up is that one thing that it causes libraries to at least consider is trying to raise private funds. Okay, so certainly the board hasn't made any decisions about this, but we've thrown around the concept of naming rights. Does this room get named after a grocery chain or something like that? And we are open to any idea that people have to defer some of that cost away from the tax levy.
One of the ways to get grants is to really have your act together. You guys clearly, I think from tonight's presentation, you do. I mean, I've been following this now for several months. There is a close alignment between the identified needs and what the expansion will do to meet those needs. And so I think that I do think there's a pretty good chance that there's some strong potential for government grants. And of course, the lower you get to 0, the more palatable this ultimately library vote will be.
Absolutely, and Mark, you're a Gilderland taxpayer, I know, as well, and And that's sort of the beginning of my thought, and I lost the second half of it. But we keep up the we have a responsibility to all Gilderland taxpayers, not just those who use the library. So, and we are aware of it. So, yes.
I have a quick question. My name is Nancy Streeter. I'm wondering if a set of the slides that you have very well presented tonight, if those might be available in the library for patrons to come and review them, and it might help to give you a little more feedback. Would that be possible?
Do you have any problem with that?
Well, I don't. I think actually it's a good idea, much as we did the dot exercise where people could come in and look at the list. One of the most interesting things is actually watching people converse with each other as they're looking at them. So I think having a display of some sort right here in the library that allowed people to come and review it would be excellent.
Maybe even with a sheet for feedback. And
Yes.
so you'd have a meeting.
No, absolutely, you'd want that. You're absolutely
Or
right.
even online, however you want to.
Is this PowerPoint or what is this?
This is PowerPoint.
So
it's very large.
It could be put on our website too.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
Yes, the website.
Yep, that's a great idea, Nancy. We will do that, so, as soon as we can. Good thought. Hey, John.
Any other comments? Just to Mark's point, and this has been an ongoing problem since I was on the board, it's difficult to get to the people that don't want to come to the library. It's something, I know, everyone on this board is always trying to think of ways to kind of get input, because, everyone in the town is a taxpayer, and it's important to get all their input on something like this, and, so, that's something that's always been on my mind, and, any suggestion to, better reach out is very important, and I would definitely take it in consideration, so.
Hi, Brian, you may not like me for this, but we have asked for public comment, and we've asked for board comment, but we have some significant portion of our staff here, so I want to ask if the staff have any questions that they want to bring up at this point. So.
Of course, yeah. No, I consider public comment all public comment, so, anyone have anything? Carol raised her hand up first, so.
When I was a tax volunteer here for many years, we had long waiting lines. And there were people who sometimes were sitting there, and I would suggest they go into the library. Most of them did, but there were some that didn't. So I might suggest to Tim or whoever's running the tax program this year that maybe they could identify if there's some of those people within the library having their taxes done, or waiting for someone, if they would like to come and look at the slides or give us some feedback.
You put a copy of them in the tax prep room.
Good idea.
So that, well, it was your idea. So. But it's still a good one. Mark just told me when I talk I have to be near a microphone, so I'm not hovering right over you.
Does anyone have any other comments? Not even necessarily on Palmaze. This is an open input, public input, so we don't usually get much, but
If
yes.
the shelves are lower, that means there's fewer books.
No, in fact, the collection grows by over 10%, the collection itself, in addition to all the program spaces and so forth. So we accounted for growth combined with a weeding program as well of what's here, typically called the Dusty Books program or whatever it may be, but obviously with modern technology, you're able to tell what circulates, what does not circulate, and then prioritize the collection that matters the most to the community. So no, the collection will not shrink, and in fact, we'll have the ability to grow over time. And with the flexibility of the mobile shelving, we can add pieces or shift components as certain collections become more important than others. So for example, graphic novels wouldn't have even been a section in a library not that long ago. Now it can be a fairly significant section with linear footage of shelving, but we can simply shift what goes there.
A couple quick thoughts, Elizabeth. One is that if you go we have a lot of library lovers here, so most people are probably familiar with the Bethlehem Public Library, and big portions of their shelving areas, not all of it, but big portions of it you can see over them, which is really good when you're there with a family, for example. And the other thing is, as Paul alluded to earlier, big portions of our user population are senior citizens and young people. And for those people in those two disparate groups, things that are way up high aren't really very good, and things that are way down low aren't really very good. And our comment cards that we have in the library, we get very, very consistently, things are too low or things are too high. So we're trying to, address that. We obviously will go and pull something off a shelf for you if you need help, but some people don't want to ask for that kind of help and so forth.
Any other comments? Anyone? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm wondering, people with young children coming in the main entrance here now have to wander through stacks to get to the children's area?
Well, there's an aisle created from the main area back to the children's, which has 2 entries to it. But as was brought up earlier, we may want to look at where the main entry for the children's space is. But that's sort of what happens now. You enter the building and the children's room is in the back of the building. It's not very intuitive. It's difficult to see from the entry. Unless you knew the children's room was there, you might wander for a while. But we're going to want to make sure that, for example, the reason these stacks and chairs are low is that you can actually see the wall of the entry to the children's. From that entry, you know exactly where you're going, and it's likely to have graphics or colors or textures that actually emphasize it as a children's room that you would see right from the minute you enter the building. And because we've changed the axis of entry, you're actually facing that as you come in. That's the first thing you see at the end wall. So, but your point is taken. We want to make sure that we make as direct and efficient a route as possible. And it came up earlier from parents and grandparents who are concerned about how far that trip is.
And if we could just get the grocery store to put the milk right inside the front door.
Any other comments, anyone? Now's the time, okay. I think we'll take maybe a 5-minute break, and so everyone who would like to leave can leave.